We're going live
Overnight,
now.
China firing back. After President Trump's 10% tariff went into effect at midnight, Beijing swiftly retaliating with tariffs on American goods, including coal, liquefied natural gas, crude oil, agricultural machinery, and pickup trucks. China also restricting the export of critical minerals used to produce high-tech products. It comes as the hefty 25% tariffs Trump threatened against Mexico and Canada are now on hold for 30 days. The looming trade war postponed after a day of frenzied negotiations. The president is accusing both countries of allowing migrants and drugs, including fentanyl, to flow into the U.S., claims both countries deny.
Canada is very tough. They're very, very tough to do business with.
After 2 phone calls with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Canada agreeing, in addition to its existing $1.3 billion border plan, to appoint a fentanyl czar, list cartels as terrorists, and launch a joint Canada-U.S. strike force to combat organized crime, fentanyl, and money laundering. U.S. officials say 43 pounds of fentanyl were seized at the northern border last year, a small fraction compared to the 21,000 pounds seized at the southern border. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum now agreeing to send more soldiers to the border to patrol for drugs and migrants.
She did agree to 10,000 soldiers on the border. I would say that's a lot.
Sheinbaum says reducing trafficking of fentanyl is a shared interest and one that she told Trump she already has a campaign to combat. The tariffs now delayed for a month to negotiate, but there is still significant uncertainty. Trump hasn't detailed what kind of progress he's looking for in order to reach a final deal and avert potentially.
Welcome to episode 14 of Politically Conscious. Got my man Emille Bryant and Shelley Wynter in this thing with me as we open with the talk of the week. So many things to talk about, but I think the tariffs was the best way to open episode 14, if you will. I'll let both of you give just a quick introduction. Don't go into the length or whatever. Obviously, you're the political consultant, and Shelley Wynter's from the Shelley Wynter Show. So glad to have that brother on, because I really want to get right into that cut. But introduce yourselves real quick. And Emille, we'll start with you, just your perspective on what's happened with of the tariffs, but just a quick introduction for both of you, and then we'll get back to you, Emille, and go back to Shelley.
For sure. Emille Bryant, I'm a political consultant, also a business consultant, and I operate my own business and have for years. So I am looking forward to this discussion because it affects everything I do.
All right, Shelley, we got you on live. I see you in the car. If you will, just introduce yourself again. I always highlight the fact that you're on every night with the Shelley Wynter Show, but anything else you want to say, and then we'll have you discuss the big talk of the town, which is these tariffs.
Yeah, Shelley Wynter, host of the Shelley Wynter Show on 95.5 WSB in Atlanta. You could listen at 95.5 if you're in Atlanta, or WSBradio.com.
Absolutely. Your thoughts on what I just played? Just kind of got into some of the details. You got the if you will, the troops at the Mexican border. So people are seeing that as a win. Basically, these tariffs have been used as a negotiation tactic, if you will. That's how I see it. Mill, your thoughts on the tariff conversation with our 3 biggest importers. Mexico, Canada, and China are our 3 biggest importers. Your thoughts?
So first on Canada, which is the easy case, less than 0.5% of fentanyl captured at the border came from the Canada or northern border. So it was kind of weird to hear him talk about Canada with the same emphasis that he did Mexico. We know where Mexico stands, and we know where China stands on fentanyl. They're producing the precursors. They're importing the precursors primarily through Mexico. But fentanyl is imported. At least the fentanyl that's caught in America is primarily caught at ports by legal U.S. residents or citizens. Like over 90% of the fentanyl captured is not from illegals. It's from legal persons entering the country through legal means at legal ports. So this conversation has multiple layers. And to me, Canada is a non-factor in the fentanyl discussion. You saw the stat 43 pounds versus 21,000 pounds. But also, it doesn't make sense to antagonize your biggest, most loyal neighbor, Canada, with tariffs that are the same as somebody like China that are really somebody who's their adversarial. So to me, it's a really strange situation. And that he got some concessions means nothing, because those concessions were with a partner that was already a dear and close ally.
And from what I understand, the tariffs were higher on Canada and Mexico than the one that was established against China.
True.
Speaking of one being an adversary, Shelley, I know you were highlighting on your page or whatever a big win with basically people were worried about the tariffs from a financial standpoint, but it's clear that it was a negotiation tactic, not just simply wanting to raise prices or going to raise prices like people are expecting, because we got a 30-day stay between Mexico and Canada. And I know you were highlighting the big win with the troops. I'd happen to listen to your station where Eric Erickson was highlighting that it should be claimed as a win with him getting the troops there, if you will. But Erickson was highlighting that, unfortunately, that same army is in the bag of those cartels, and the fentanyl will probably still just come through. That was his perspective on the troops being pushed to the border, but it definitely looks like a political win. Your thoughts on the tariffs?
Well, first of all, Scheinbaum had offered Biden troops at the border, and most of what she gave, or Trump negotiated, if you will, was offered to Biden. He turned him down. So that's the first thing. So if the argument is most of the fentanyl and drugs comes across the Mexican border by anybody, whether it's American citizens or whomever, the previous administration was offered the same thing and turned it down for whatever reason. As to Canada, fentanyl was not the only thing that comes across the border. That was what they highlighted, was with the fentanyl. With the Canadian border, guns, a bunch of weed, coke, a lot of things flow through the Canadian border, particularly in Ottawa, from Ottawa, which is more central, which is kind of more of a more wilderness area. And so and human trafficking is picked up in Canada as well. So I think that, yes, there is a thought that you don't want to piss off your closest ally, that person on your border. But I think there's also a situation where you're just, you're saying, hey, look, man, let's play straight with each other. Do I think it's something that needed to be done week 2? Probably not. But I understand that what he's doing, he's throwing everything against the wall that he said he was going to do, and he knows he can do them. These things he can do through executive order, and so that's what he's doing. So I really don't have an issue with the tariff talk with Canada and Mexico. Both sides are playing it to their advantage. Scheinbaum is saying that she didn't cave, and Trump saying they caved to us. And I mean, it's just PR for everybody to look good to their people. But I don't think it really is that significant in terms of what was happening. The China tariff, the reason why you don't want to levy a 25% tariff on China is simply because we bring so much in from there. And at 10%, if you look at the 10% number based on all the volume of goods that we bring from that we get from China, it's a lot of money. So you don't have to levy 25% on China, because it's such a volume of goods that are coming over. So I those were, I had, huh?
Let him finish real quick. Let him finish, and then you can say.
I understand. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, let him finish.
Yeah. No, I'm done. I'm done.
Okay, go ahead. I know you had something.
It's a tax on America, and that's the problem. And I understand why he's doing it. I'm not saying that it's not a tactic, but the fact is that Americans are going to be paying this price. And right now, Americans are feeling the pinch from inflation. They're feeling the pinch from profit taking, right? So a lot of these companies that swear up and down they're being hammered by inflation are also still, after 4 years, recording record profits. So there's a bunch of inflation that's attributable to profits, and another bunch of inflation that's attributable to the regular forces of inflation that have gone on. So when you throw 10%, it might not be as large as Canada or Mexico, especially given Canada and Mexico have energy, which is their number one export to America. Energy is excluded from these tariff bumps, right? So you're looking at even less money coming from Canada and Mexico, or money coming out of Americans' pockets, than from China, who isn't a big energy exporter or importer to America. So that 10% is going to apply to a lot more things across the board, dollar for dollar, than Canada and Mexico. And Americans are the ones who are going to pay all of that price.
Right. I think that's been made clear just from hearing the tariff talks. I think, in my opinion, just to be fair, since it ended up being more of a negotiation tactic, I think we have to kind of wait and see how the tariffs end up playing out, because they may not be levied if they were in fact just a tactic, if that makes sense. So I just want to, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just highlighting. It's clear now that we have social media, everybody's explaining how tariffs work. Like we explained it, what episode 2 or 3 on this show.
We sure did.
How to explain them better than I've ever heard. So I'm just saying, so people understand now the tariff isn't necessarily to the country, but it's, we have to definitely give credit to, in a sense, how it played out, because we didn't know when the talk was first thrown out that it was just a leveraging tactic. And I'll highlight this and go to another cut. That when Shelley says it's just kind of PR for all parties, like Canada even trying to stand strong, they're up, from what I understand, I think it's Trudeau's up for election here pretty soon. So some of his standing strong or not, in a sense, wanting to cave plays in part to his constituents in his country too. So now that Trump threw him out there, everybody's kind of played in the dog and pony show for what it is. So I think it's kind of a wait and see how do these tariffs play out, because they may not even be levied. I'm just throwing that out from how I see it at this point. But let's go to this next cut, if you will. If you are first time listener to the Politically Conscious Show, we react to media around the internet or on TV, and give you our politically conscious thoughts, if you will. So let me scroll down to this next one. I had it lined up. Give me a second. Here we go.
U.S. Agency for International Development it started as an executive order under Kennedy. Now, back in those days, right? Hear me out. Back in those days, it was a decent idea, right? Coming out of starting the Cold War, you're coming out of World War II. The whole world is in flux, right? Like countries, you have countries that were colonized who are seeking independence, and they can go to the highest bidder, meaning communists or Russia or America, right? These are two big players, Russia and America. And Europe is there, but Europe is devastated. They just, they're 15, maybe a little under 20 years out of World War II. They're devastated. They have no money. They're not doing anything. The Cold War is between the U.S. and Russia for control for the ideological control and control basically of the planet. So you have a lot of countries, African countries especially, that were looking at communism, looking at democracy. You got Caribbean countries, you got countries, Eastern European countries. All these countries are looking, they're coming out of they're coming to freedom. And so you start this agency so you can give aid, the idea being, well, if we can help people grow crops, eradicate diseases, educate them, we can control them. That's the whole idea. So you start this U.S. Agency for International Development. You pass out money, essentially, to get people on your side. Well, it's 2025. All the billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars that we've given away over the course of decades, from the 60s till now, many, many, many years, almost 60 years, just handing out money to the tune of billions of dollars, taxpayer money, because the government doesn't make anything. You're extracting taxes from hardworking people, and you're giving it to somebody else, hoping that they'll be your friend. That's essentially what it is. And over the course of years, the Chinese, over the course of the last maybe 10 or 12 years, the Chinese went into these same countries now, said, hey, man, we're going to build you a road. And those countries are now, hey, China, you're our friend now. So wasted money, essentially, because you're buying your friends. And everybody knows if you buy your friends, they're not going to be loyal to you. You're just buying them. They're going to be there until the money dries up. And now the money's dried up.
Shelley, hold on. Give me a second, man. All right, that should clear it up. If you're ready, I'll go to Emille if I need to. But I want to let you. Okay, we still got a backfeed. You can hear that, Emille?
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. Testing. I think we might be clear now.
No
okay.
Echo.
All right, good. Shelley, did you want to respond real quick? I see you kind of busy.
Yeah, I'll let Emille go first. I'll be right there.
All right, no problem.
All right, no problem.
Well, yep, cool. Emille, you haven't seen that cut. Obviously, that's Shelley on his show talking about U.S. aid, which obviously was another big thing. Again, we're just running through these things because there's a lot coming at us right now, right? And so U.S. aid completely stopped, and you hear Shelley break out exactly what U.S. aid, as good as the name sounds, in his opinion, what is actually used for. And I would agree with him. What is used for to help build friendships, quote unquote, with other countries and to essentially control them. That part I would absolutely agree with, just from a personal standpoint. Your thoughts on Shelley's thoughts on U.S. aid being stopped?
I mean, have we ever read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People? I mean, it's the same basic concept. USAID has been around since the 60s. It was authorized in law in 1998. So there is a law authorizing this agency that's independent of the State Department. That's a very important point because USAID has its own agenda. People don't realize that AID is a friend to many countries who are going through transition. Just because a country was seeking independence from its colonial masters in the 50s and 60s doesn't mean that today it is a fully developed and well-run country. I have beef with USAID, big beef with it, because it has done some harm to many countries that were trying to get better. But at the same time, it has done well to be a great agent for change in many nations. So you have on both sides, as you will with America very frequently, some good happening and some bad happening. Instead of weeding out the parts of USAID that are detrimental to U.S. foreign policy or that are harmful to the development of nations friendly to us, we're seeing that agency shut down in toto. And again, maybe there's a larger plan afoot to root out the things that are harmful to American interests. But what I see right now is not that. Rather, I see a takeover of an agency that's authorized by law. So it's Congress that has to shut it down. If Congress started it, Congress closes it. It's the only way you do business. And in between, there are at least some reported compromises of secure systems that AID has access to in order to do its business in concert with the State Department. Now we have other issues afoot that we must recognize could be harmful to America, because we don't know who these people are that are helping close down or root out the things that are happening in USAID. Are these people sworn to uphold the oath? Are they people who have America's interests at heart? We're assuming that because they work for somebody, but we're not sure because they haven't followed the proper procedures to close down an agency, i.e. go through Congress, build up a law that says AID meets this criteria or it gets shut down, or it roots out that corruption if there's corruption to be rooted out. That problem does not exist because Congress has not had a chance to debate a law it passed, funding it appropriated, and make sure that that funding was allocated properly, which is Congress's job. So we have multiple things happening at the same time. So when we talk about AID, it can't simply be bad or good or right or wrong. It's much more nuanced. And AID is an example of what happens when you let people who have no accountability go into an agency and do whatever they want to.
Yeah. Shelley, we gotta figure that out. Because you didn't get it.
It could be.
Are you listening to it?
No. No.
Testing.
Okay. It's still there. You know what? I might still be on. Hold on.
Whatever you're on. I kicked it off, but it's still there. All right, y'all.
Give us a second. Hear Shelley.
Did you use two invites? You were on here twice.
Yeah, no, I'm wondering. Let me just leave and start all over.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious about. I'm not surprised. Again, that's why y'all are the political consultants on this show, if you will. But I wasn't aware of the law part, which changes everything because this is not the only. All right, let's see if we can get Shelley without the echo now. Testing. All right, we good now. I think.
Okay.
I think
so yeah, to USAID, to
Yeah, let me
what
say one thing. I don't know if you heard me when you were flipping out. Only thing I said, I was curious. I didn't know that the USAID was a law, which
it's actually not
yeah,
USAID
I
is a
didn't know
law.
that part. That was
Yeah,
curious.
no, well, it's yes and no, right? So John F. Kennedy started USAID as an executive order. The year that Emille's talking about, Congress agreed to spend the money because the Congress is the spending arm of the government. They're the one with the checkbook. They signed a checkbook, and so that's what was it wasn't signed into law. USAID as an entity wasn't signed into law. The expenditures of the money were. And so what's going on now is, because it was started as an executive order, Trump is just shutting down what's being spent, which he's allowed to do, right? It's not saying that I'm canceling it, not saying that I'm taking it away. He's allowed to say, okay, we're going to freeze the funding, right? And we're going to go forward line by line and see what's going on. And what's happening, honestly, is the reporting that's coming out beyond, what Emille talked about people having access and stuff like that. I'm troubled by that too, but I'm waiting to see, how much of that is true and how much of it is just media fabrication. But what's the American people are seeing through reporting is how much of their taxpayer dollars were going to frivolous stuff. And I think that is the biggest story. It's not really, about countries and stuff like that. It's about what we were doing with money that's not yours. The government, it's not the government's money, it's the taxpayers' money. And as people find out about, LGBT drag shows, yes, it's only $14,000, $20,000 in Ecuador. People are starting to realize, well, wait a minute, how much more of this is going on? Billions of dollars in Burma for student scholarships, right? Billions, not millions, billions of dollars to Burma for student scholarships, which is really, I'll be honest with you, and I said it on my show, which is really the CIA funding pro-student democracies in a country where the military is in charge. That's really what it is. And so we can make the argument from a geopolitical standpoint if that's necessary. But I think what the American people want to know and want stopped is the spending, because every time they drive to work, just using here in Atlanta as an example, every time they drive to work, they're seeing homeless veterans living under a bridge. They're seeing food banks that every year have to raise money from the public in order to stay around. They're seeing public schools where teachers have to spend their own money for school supplies, and any number of nonprofits every year in August do school supply drives because the state and the city and the federal government can't fund it. So I think that's the more important issue that's coming out here. We can have a nuanced conversation about, what's important USAID money to spend, where it's important to spend. But I think the bigger issue, the bigger story here is we need to be focused on, whoa, wait a minute, why is any of our dollars going someplace else? Ukraine, places like, all of it is tied together. And I think the transparency that we're seeing now is a lot of people are getting mad. Why I'm mad at Democrats, not Emille, because Emille's point is different than the point I just made, and Emille's point is different than a point that I'm seeing people make on social media and within the Democrat Party. But what I'm kind of confused about is, here it is. Let's just talk about the African American community. Here it is. The African American community is the base of the Democrat Party. And you're literally being shown billions and billions of dollars going out to foreign countries, not in terms of defending themselves or building their military, but going out to billions of dollars going out to foreign countries for things like LGBT issues and for other non-serious issues, I would say. And you're sitting here as the base of the Democrat Party, and you're still looking for basic school funding in inner city communities. You're still looking for basic social services for the least of these in the community. And you're the base of the Democrat Party. You're not some frivolous Democrat, demographic that barely votes Democrat. You're the base. If you go away, if the African-American vote goes away from the Democratic Party, it ceases to exist. And you're looking at all this money floating out of this country, while at the same time, for the last 10 years, many in the Democrat Party, white and black, have told you that reparations money is not there because we don't have enough. But you're seeing billions of dollars every single year going out of this country to foreign countries for the LGBT community. And so at a certain point, whether you agree with Trump or not, whether you agree with black Republicans or not, whether you agree with Shelley Wynter or not, at a certain point, pure logic dictates that you say, whoa, wait a minute, huh? What's going on here?
Emille, your response to Shelley.
Foreign aid is 1/20th the DoD budget. It is less than 1% of the GDP of this nation. In fact, it's far less than 1% of the GDP of this nation. Last year, total $70 billion. Last reported year was 2022. $70 billion total went to foreign aid. That $70 billion is a drop in the Pentagon's bucket. It's not even the budget for the F-35. So the questions that we're answering are not necessarily, should we walk and chew gum? We can do foreign aid, which is a small part of the overall budget in America. It's a $6 trillion budget that we're using to fund the federal government's activities in America, across all of the federal government's activities. Of that, 70 billion in 2022 went to foreign aid. That's pure red herring. To me, it's a misnomer to think that foreign aid dollar somehow affecting domestic spending. VA has the second largest budget in the federal budget, right? The VA's budget is the second largest, second to DOD, right, of all federal agencies. So when we talk about homeless veterans, we have money for homeless veterans. I am a veteran. I understand. I worked with VA on homeless veteran programs. We have money for homeless veterans. The fact that that money is not being deployed properly is a problem. Not that we don't have it. We do have it, and we've budgeted for it. Now, the question is, how do we deploy it to the veterans that need it most? Completely different than should we spend money in foreign aid. Shelley's right. There are programs that appear frivolous, and we need to understand the context of every one of those programs. We may be making friends with little programs that cost $15,000 to $30,000. Perhaps we're making friends, and Shelley's 100% right. In Burma, we are making friends that may destabilize a government that has been hostile to the United States. I do not necessarily agree with how the CIA does its work. I do not necessarily agree that State Department, CIA, and USAID working together is a good thing. But I do agree that in order for, or where I disagree, is that foreign aid is somehow a problem that Black people are not getting money because it's going to Ukraine or it's going. Now, we have money for everybody. The problem is that Black people in America don't get the money they're supposed to get. It has nothing to do with money going over to Ukraine or going over to Burma or going anywhere else. That money is set aside right here in America for Americans. The fact that we're not getting it is a completely separate problem from money that goes outside of the United States.
If I can address that, and I'm afraid, Montoya, I may need to go because I just got a text from my radio station. I think I got to call them up. But one thing I do want to say about what Emille just said, first of all, $6 trillion budget, what the American people voted on was that's too much. Regardless of where it's going, it's too much, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is if my wife and I have a budget in the house, right? And I say, hey, honey, we got to cut our spending. And I'm going to freeze all our spending except for rent and car payment stuff we can't freeze. But for, non-essentials, as we would call it, right? Or even essentials, we're going to freeze the budget. And she says, oh, I want to go to the nail salon. The answer back can't be, well, the nail salon's only $20. So it's not necessarily what the amount of percentage of foreign aid is in our budget, because in a $6 trillion budget, even that whatever percentage you just said, and you're right, it's not a lot, but that percentage of a $6 trillion budget represents hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. And so that when we use percentages, we have to be careful because we're talking about a $6 trillion annual budget. So that's really where we are. And I think that's really what we have to pay attention to. But the bigger issue is, why is that budget $6 trillion? Is that a necessary annual budget for the United States of America? And I think that's what's at the heart That's what is at the heart of these cuts, and what they're looking at is freezing the money, where the money's going, and start the line by line item. And if you remember historically, Republicans and Democrats in the Clinton era, when they were more moderate, have always wanted a line by line veto of the federal budget, and we've never been able to really. We have sometimes, but we consistently have not been able to get to that. And I think that's a large part of what's going on here. Freeze all the spending. Let's see where the money's going, and then we get to cut things piece by piece.
Yeah, and that part makes sense, but you kind of moved away from you made the extra point about our community, so I kind of want to close that out and realize, even in your analogy, actually freezing all the spending in your house ends up being $1 out of 100. Like, you still got to put the entire context on it. So it would be like, I froze everything. You and your wife or lady froze everything in your thing, and it would be you saying, she would say, can I buy a piece of gum? I mean, can I buy a pack of gum for $1? You're still gonna say yeah in that, and that's the context.
Well, so no, maybe not. That's what I'm trying to say. Are you buying up? So hold on.
It's $1 out of 100, though.
Well, no, that's not the. But that's I mean, if you want to go to a pack of gum, that's not the analogy I used. I use nails. So, which is much expense, which is probably not a huge percentage of the budget of the household. Hold on, it's not the budget of the household, but it's still a significant amount of money that we're trying to freeze to say, where can we better spend this money? Do we have to do it every week? Can we do it once a month? That's what's going on here. To keep the analogy the same, going to a pack of gum trivializes my argument.
I can go to your nails and still realize, if y'all are freezing the budget and y'all got $4,000 of free money, you're probably gonna let her get the nails. You still gotta put it in context. So $40 for nails, you got $4,000.
But if the nails are $200, if the nails are $200 a week, that's $800 a month. Now we're looking at $9,600 a year. Now it's close to $10,000 a year. So that's how you do budgeting.
You're only doing one part of it. You still got to do. You're still, if you got 9, that means you got 9. What's the 10% of it?
It doesn't matter.
You can't just do. You got to do both of them to have context.
You got to me the problem.
No, the context. Hold on, it's not about context. The context is already in what Emille said. Well, no, hold on. What I mean by that, the context was already said in what Emille said. It's a $6 trillion budget. That's the context. That's what you're trying to trim down. So first of all, that's the context. You're already spending an inordinate amount of money in $6 trillion.
Right, so but you're moving it away from what you talked about, how you were talking about how African
in real dollars. I was talking about in real dollars.
Right.
Why
move to the bigger budget when your original argument?
I only moved to the bigger budget because Emille did. I didn't move to the bigger budget. Emille did. No, he said the budget is $6 trillion.
But he said it because he was highlighting what you talked about specifically for how the African Americans, logically, as you said, should move away because they're saying there's no money for
So if you have a and Emille agreed with that.
Let me finish. So what I'm saying is, I'm just trying to give the context is you can't just pick one of those numbers to make your point. You have to.
I did it. I was picking okay. Hold on. Look, first of all, we're talking about USAID. We weren't talking about the full budget. We weren't talking about the defense budget. We weren't talking about transportation budget. We're talking about USAID. That was the context. You played a clip of me talking about USAID. So we're only talking about USAID. Then I made my point, and then I said, I find it interesting that people who are the base of the Democrat Party are not saying, wow, this is a lot of money being spent here. We could use some of that money in our communities, which is something that people may or may not say. It doesn't matter. I'm thinking it's logical to ask that question. Emille then went on to talk about a $6 trillion budget and how much foreign aid represents. And so I'm now responding to that in context, saying, doesn't matter what the budget is. First of all, the budget's too much. That's what a lot of people voted for, to cut that budget from $6 trillion.
I don't want to read it the whole argument. I'm just
so I'm not sure what you mean.
Highlighting that if your lady says she wants to go out to get a $40 thing, it's why you got $4,000 in your pocket based on the number. I'm just saying.
But that doesn't matter. If I'm trying to cut my spending, I've got to look at every area to cut my spending. That's all I'm saying.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just highlighting that that's why you got $4,000 in your pocket. You probably would give it to her. That's all I'm highlighting.
But I'm saying, that's a different issue. That's a relationship. That's a relationship issue. I can't even cut the budget. So
logic. I'm just saying your lady, you're probably going to give her $40 if you got.
I'm probably not even going to have the conversation about cutting the budget, but maybe it was a wrong analogy.
That you can't dismiss what 1% is all I'm highlighting. But let's talk about the access. Let's play this cut.
I just want to be clear about what's going on here. The system that makes sure that your granddad gets his Social Security check, the system that makes sure that your mom's doctor gets Medicare payment to cover her medical appointment, and the system that makes sure that you get the tax refund that you're owed has been taken over by Elon Musk. And every organization from your state government that uses federal money on that bridge project to the local Head Start that takes care of little kids while their mommies and daddies go to work is now at the mercy of Elon Musk. Elon just grabbed the controls of our whole payment system, demanding the power to turn it on for his friends or turn it off for anyone he doesn't like. Now, there's a second problem here. It's not just payments from the federal government that are now in Elon's control. Elon and his handful of friends now have full access to your personal and financial information that's in the system. Your payment history, your Social Security number, your bank account numbers. Elon now has the power to suck out all of that information for his own use. And there is a third problem. In order for this handful of programmers to gain access to our $6 trillion payment system, we don't know what safeguards were pulled down. Are the gates wide open now for hackers from China, from North Korea, from Iran, from Russia? Heck, who knows what black hat hackers all around the world are finding out about each one of us and copying that information for their own criminal uses. Donald Trump and his billionaire buddies are determined to take over this government to make it work better for themselves and worse for everyone else. And this is just the start. As we gear up for...
Shelley, any thoughts? Oh, there he dropped right what it keeps happening with him today. All right, Emille, back to you then. Your response. I know you and I were very concerned about, what's the term they're using in the media now, the broligarchs, if you will. I don't know if you heard that one, but I've seen that.
I have not heard that. Was a good one. I like it though.
They call them the broligarchs. They're sitting right behind, and we were saying this could be just a situation of transparency, but we wasn't certain or not, that it was a good look to have the three richest people in the country sitting right behind them, if you will. And I think Elizabeth Warren specifically highlighting Elon's role recently as being too risky for all of us. I know I don't like what I'm hearing. What is your perspective based on any research you've done?
So you can't say this is a nation that honors the rule of law if this is truly what's happening, right? So I'm going by what's reported. Even Elon Musk has said he has access to this payment system. He said that himself on Twitter. So the question I have is multifaceted. She hits on most of the things that concern me. One, who are these people that have access to these systems? Are they read in? Have they taken oaths to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic? One. Two, are they doing the Lord's work? Here's what I mean. The Treasury Department was recently about to upgrade a legacy system that they are now in to a new system that would help control, because they were doing their regular scheduled updates, something that is very hard to do in the federal government. If you've ever done software implementation or legacy system upgrades in the federal government, as I have, that is a long, arduous process, and it is slow. And for tech bros, it can be very frustrating, but there's method to the madness. And even if we don't like it, the thing works. And it's relatively speaking secure. We have no idea who's got access to those systems, what access they have. And the fact that one person who we did not elect, who was not appointed, who did not go through a congressional or senatorial advice and counsel screening, it now can say, and he quoted himself, I can quote him as saying, I can figure out who's getting paid and I'm turning it off. He said that about Lutheran Family Services. So he says, I don't like them. They're corrupt. I'm shutting them off. To say that And oh, by the way, to have the president have to remind Elon Musk that he reports to his chief of staff, because it was reported that the president's chief of staff said, Elon Musk, you still work for the president and you still have to come through me. The fact that he had to be reminded of that publicly, if that's a true report, tells you a lot about what's happening inside these agencies that have been infiltrated by people who do not have the proper training, who by the reports I'm reading, do not have the proper clearance, and who do not necessarily have the interests of the American people at heart, because they were not elected nor appointed to do what they're doing.
Shelley, I know as an Air Force officer, I didn't get too high on my clearances, but it was definitely a process, and the higher you go, a longer process. So I think a big concern for those who understand government clearance, it seems as if Elon has skipped that whole process and now has access to too much information. That's definitely how it appears for a lot of us. Your thoughts on what you're seeing? Because I don't think any of us necessarily saw this part coming.
So, first of all, the people that are working in the Treasury with Elon, these are extremely, these are not IT people. Like, these are not people that, hey, I got an IT, I'm in computer sciences, and I got a degree from, Georgia State. Many of these people have PhDs. Many of these people have patented work that's going on. Many of these, because a young man doxed them, and when they doxed them where their homes were, people were able to see their names and pulled up their backgrounds. These are like tremendously brilliant computer engineers coming from Elon Musk's either SpaceX, Tesla, or some of his other companies. So that's the first thing. Second of all, traditionally, the people who had access to all of this information have been contractors, right? These are not employees, and American bureaucrats have had the same access. So the argument now is that a guy I don't like has now access to these systems and this information, but that's just the real truth of the matter is people have always had access to this information, and they weren't elected either.
It's not uncontrolled access, though, Shelley.
It's not uncontrolled here.
Out has to swear an oath in order to access this information.
Absolutely.
I don't know if people have done that.
I get that, but I am more concerned with my data and my information being held by a social media owned company, meaning Twitter, right, than I am as to any other information. That's my biggest concern. I understand what's going on, but that's my biggest concern, and I'm keeping a very close eye on that, honestly. But the fact that Elon wasn't elected, I mean, the whole point of why Trump was elected, because he talked about it in 2016. He tried to do it when he was there the first time, but he couldn't because many of the people around him were entrenched people in the system. This time he's got a bunch of outsiders who are not part of the system. And part of what we elected was getting rid of the bureaucratic control over the policies that they weren't elected to implement, which is why you have USAID giving money to El Salvador or Ecuador to push transgender issues. No one elected people to do that. So I think that's what's going on. The big picture is that. The small minutia is me saying, you know what? I'm very concerned about this Twitter owner having access to some information that may be my information. Not saying he hasn't already had access to it, but having that kind of access. That's more my concern. The fact that he wasn't elected, the truth of the matter is that's not a real attack point, because Elon Musk actually was elected because he was on a campaign trail. No, what I'm saying, he was on. When I say he was elected, I don't mean
I agree
specifically.
He was elected. I agree, because this is an administrative coup of the highest order. So I agree.
No, it's not. No, it's not. There 77 million people voted for this, and we knew we couldn't.
Not. No, Shelley, they did not vote for this.
And 75 million did.
Right, but
access
to systems. They did not vote for that. They voted for. Look, The Republicans control Congress. If they wanted to pass a law right now, they could. President Trump could sign that law, and all of this could be done legally. Right now, it is either unconstitutional or illegal. And
And so here's the game.
The rule of law, you've done nothing.
I totally agree with you, Emille. But here's the game. People voted for Trump. They didn't vote for a Republican Party. That's one thing Republicans have to pay attention to. So based on what you just said, Emille, and you're right, Republicans need to do this. If they don't choose to do it, they will pay the wrath of the voters at the voting boxes.
I don't know what we'll look like in 2 years, brother.
I think we'll look fine. I think we'll be just fine. I really do.
Trust that you have.
For the second time,
the reason why I say that is because I heard the same thing in 2017 and 2018 and 2019. I don't know what it's going to look like in 2020. It's the same thing being said. I'm not worried. The country's not going anywhere.
For the sake of time, I'm going to get to another cut so we can try to get some more info out. So let's do this. All right.
There you go.
What's up, Mr. Dookie?
I just have one question for you.
Go ahead.
Will you ever criticize Trump and the GOP for anything, any anti-black things they do and say?
They haven't done any anti-black policies. So, yeah, I'm not criticizing. There's nothing to criticize. There's no anti.
That's the answer. That's all I needed to know.
Right.
It tells me everything I need to know. Thank you, sir.
There you go. Yeah. Ain't no anti-black policies. Yeah. Show me the anti-black policies. And there is none. Trump has not put out no anti-black policies. Now that he's been in for the week or so he's been in, there's no anti-black policies. In fact, they've been giving us props. As far as our lineage, they've actually talked highly and positively of our lineage. There's no anti-black. See, that's the thing. We're not jumping in front of the sword for other groups. You see? We're not jumping in front of the sword for other groups now. That's the immigration. That's not our issue. Yeah. That ain't our issue.
So you hear a cut from Tariq Nasheed from his perspective, pointing out, and we highlighted this a little bit last show, if you recall, Emille. I was curious about even when Trump on the first day highlighted, if you will, how he, in a sense, felt about DEI, and he closed that comment speaking to what was happening with transgender issues. And I asked both of you, to a degree, is a lot of this collateral damage when it comes to the African American community? And you hear Tariq Nasheed, I don't know if you're familiar with him, highlighting that he feels like everything that he's seen isn't necessarily directed at us. And again, I'm saying that just from the standpoint of when you pay attention to where the focus is, I don't know that things are directed towards the African American community the way that we seem to be receiving it. Emille, go ahead with your thoughts on that.
So, nobody's going to yell the N-word. Nobody's going to put on a Klan robe and hood. Nobody's going to overtly discriminate against Black people in 2025, at least not at that level. But what do I see? Very clearly, the Minority Business Development Agency is now no longer using the things that define a minority in America by law as criteria to advance a business's interests. In other words, they're no longer the Minority Business Development Agency if you can't use race or ethnicity. The 8A program from under SBA is suspended until further notice. One of the best ways that Black-owned businesses can get a leg up with federal government contracts. These are direct assaults on the ability for Black businesses to do business with the federal government, which spends $6 trillion a year. That is not to say that these are quote unquote anti-Black programs. Perhaps the baby, bathwater, plumbing, and sink are all being thrown out at the same time. But I can tell you that right now, it sure looks pretty bad for Black people when it comes to contracting with the federal government, because we have no longer been given the opportunity to build our small businesses that have been traditionally excluded. We talked about this last week, and Shelley made a great point about lots of things happening that, 40 years later, maybe didn't necessarily grow the Black businesses the way that people envisioned. Yet we're in 2025, and we are seeing that the tools that help Black businesses get better at being good businesses for federal contracting are going away. So maybe these are not anti-Black policies, but they are anti-Black actions.
Shelley, I'll give you a response, and I got to go to another cut. And then we only got 10 minutes left, so I want to get at least one more cut in, but I'll give you a response.
So I agree with Emille, but the DEI programs that are being cut is by and large not inclusive of the minority business, and I think that's going to come back. And that's going to come back due to pressure from Black conservatives who have the president's ear. And the way it's going to come back is going to come back where the people being picked are not going to be total insiders who they've traditionally been. And so I think that's what's going to happen. Those are the conversations that I'm having with African-American conservatives around the country, that there's going to be a new set of what we would call Black businesses that are coming into this federal contracting space. They're going to be more conservative. They're going to be more in line with the party. And it's just, before you had people that were connected to the Democrats, now you're going to have people connected to the Republicans that are going to get these contracts. Kelly Loeffler is going to be the SBA administrator. And so she recognizes that we have relationships, and we've already had those discussions. The next thing I'm going to say, but when you talk about DEI programs, right? Because that's not a catchphrase meaning Black. That's a catchphrase meaning LGBT. And that's what we have to recognize, that those programs that are being cut, like from Walmart, Target, from Walmart and Target and stuff like that, those programs really focused on bringing in a new distressed or dispossessed a minority group, and nothing to do with us. If you go to Walmart and Target right now, you got all sorts of African Americans working in those companies at every level. So those DEI programs that they're talking about cutting have nothing to do with Black. And I think that we are doing ourselves a disservice in 2025 by keeping the focus that they're attacking us, to the point of the video, not to Emille's point, but to the point of the video.
Nah, fair enough. And what I like about what just happened, just to put this perspective out there, I've always wanted to make sure that we were at least in the room. And so we've gotten so divided politically that, if you remember, during Trump's first term, we were actually chiding people that he would even sit down and talk, right? And so I love to hear what Shelley just pointed out, in that if things are going to be removed, they have people in the room that are pressuring and making sure that Black businesses are, in a sense, going to be covered. So I like that. And the only way you can do that, my only point is to be in the room. Don't ever let, any amount of propaganda or any amount of fervor make you say we can't even talk to that person. And as we highlighted on, I think 2 shows ago, when we're talking about how transactional Trump is, you have to be in the room to even have a shot. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing that Shelley pointed out. So I just wanted to share that. All right, let me get at least one more cut in before we get out of here, y'all. Let me see which one.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. MAGA worlds blamed this scourge for everything from the fires in California to the attack on Bourbon Street to inflation to the Baltimore Bridge collapse to why your children are confused about the race of mermaids. Because mermaids, boys and girls, are gingers. They've always been there. The latest example being the plane crash in Washington. It was the DEIist. But don't take my word for it. Let's let MTV's Road Rules star and Fox and Friends B-teamer explain DEI.
You can't focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion when you try to hire air traffic controllers. You want the best. You want the brightest, protecting yourself and your family.
We will have the best and brightest in every position possible. It is colorblind and merit-based.
Look, there's a lot of reasons why the FAA is in a bad place. But these guys would have you believe that the main problem is that standards were somehow lowered to make sure that a black person or a gay person gets a chance to land your plane, even though the requirements to become an air traffic controller are the same. But by culture warring this tragedy, Americans spent that terrible night holding their breath that the pilot or the air traffic controller wouldn't be a woman or a black person or in a wheelchair. Because what they're trying to do is make the default setting on competence in America a white guy. That's what this is, a reset to the factory default. Because, of course, these two are there purely based on merit and smarts. And it's just taken for granted. It undercuts every black person of color, woman in this country, that the job that they have, they don't deserve. It's the mantra in the Republican Party that gives you brain-turning moments like this.
In the United States of America, we get ahead and succeed by merit and merit alone.
Yes, merit and merit alone, says RNC chairwoman Lara. Hold on, let me get my glasses. Trump. It was a blind submission, never saw her name on the application. That's the irony of this whole thing. The people standing next to Trump on that terrible night, blaming DEI and trying to reinstall white guys as the only non-suspect pool of hires, are themselves DEI hires. For one.
Let me get Shelley back on. He got back in here. So
yeah,
I think that is a fight for resources, just to remind you of our last discussion on the last show. Go ahead, Shelley.
No, I've been very critical of conservatives about using DEI as a catch-all. And the night that Trump gave, or the morning Trump gave that press conference, I went on my show and I was very critical. And as this turned out, because one, we didn't know that DEI was even involved in that accident. Number one. Number two, it had nothing to do with sharing condolences and praying for the families. And number three, as the more facts have come out, all three people on that plane were white people. Well, forgetting race for a second, the one pilot was, the co-pilot was a lesbian. And so, again, DEI having nothing to do with it, and we're finding out that the entire accident was at the fault of the Black Hawk helicopter pilots. So I think that, I have been very, very critical of the entire idea that anything, you see is a DEI hire. One of the things when Karen Jean-Pierre, that the right talked about her, she actually had experience at being a comms director. Carolyn Levitt, as good as she may be, and I think she's a good press secretary, has never been a press secretary except for the campaign, and even then she wasn't the chief spokesperson. So I think that there's this idea that what I've been saying, and I'm telling Republicans to be leery of this. There are not enough of us as Republicans to win elections in and of just by ourselves. The only way for us to win elections is by bringing people into a broader tent. And if everybody you're bringing into the broader tent, you're accusing of not having a real job because they only got it because of DEI, you're hard pressed to get those people back to the polls. And so with the midterms coming up, I tell Republican voters, stop with this. Beyonce didn't win album of the year, or country music album of the year, because of DEI. Now, if anything, she won it because they're a powerful couple in the music industry, her and Jay-Z. That's power. That's not DEI. It's complete opposite of DEI. And so this idea that everything that's happening, it's truly racist in its true sense of the word, but it's also it's belittling. And at the end of the day, it's actually costing midterms and it's costing elections. Right now, the Republican Party has goodwill with minority voters, Hispanics, African Americans, young people. They have goodwill. We're burning that goodwill on a daily basis by saying things that really make no sense.
And Emille, I think what you're hearing, because I knew Shelley had made that conversation on his show, is what you talked about that you said on one of the shows, you said you had no doubt that in his responsibility as a voter that he would do such. And so this is an example of him doing exactly what you talked about just a couple of shows ago, if you will. Your thoughts. Oh, you got something real quick? I know you got to go.
Yeah, no, I got to go.
Yeah,
I apologize for today.
No, you got to. Yeah,
we're
at the hour.
Yeah,
so
the wifey's not feeling well, so I've been running around getting this chicken soup stuff. So that's why I've been kind of in and out. But I'll see y'all next week.
Is that in the budget? Is that in the budget?
It is. It is. I'll tell you what. No. I'm gonna answer that. It is because I went to the dollar store.
All right, brother.
I'll see you.
Take care, brother.
Yeah, we're at the hour of the meal, but any thoughts on that? I got one more cut if you got time, but go ahead.
I do have time, and I do have thoughts on this last one. And the thing is, anybody who knows, black person, a woman who's gotten to the level that they're being accused of not being qualified is uber qualified, more qualified. You can look at Ketanji Brown Jackson, and you know she is the most qualified Supreme Court justice we've seen in probably 50 years. Right. Because in order to even be considered for that stuff, you got to be at the top of the game every single day, no breaks. So to hear this kind of conversation, Shelley's spot on. It's demeaning because we know what it takes to get to that level. That pilot, maybe she was in error, but it wasn't because she was a woman. She was a combat pilot with hundreds of hours in combat. So we know she was a good pilot. Maybe she made a mistake, which happens in air transportation. Unfortunately for the families that this tragedy happened, but it is not uncommon that a fully qualified, highly qualified pilot can make a mistake. And when that happens, our hearts go out to the families. But to use that to talk about DEI, it's painful. Now, to your point about a fight for resources, let me tell you, there is a fight that has been happening for at least 150 years since the end of the Civil War over who's going to control the purse of the federal government. And right now, what we're seeing is that there is somebody who has a specific belief, who has his hands at the very controls of whether a check gets cut. What that means is when you talk about DEI and merit-based, really what we're talking about is who can control the checkbook long enough to move the resources where they need to be. And merit has
where they want them to be, not need to be, where they want them to be.
Where that individual wants it to go. That's right. So
absolutely,
DEI has nothing to do with that. That's all about power.
Power, yeah. And so I wish we still had Shelley here for this next cut, because again, I wanted to highlight. He was like, "Oh, it's not about resources." Hey, crazy to me. And speaking of DEI. And then again, I wish I had Shelley for this because he and I had a personal back and forth, and I wanted to bring on a doctor to speak specifically to, if y'all recall, when we did the nomination show, I think you and Shelley were most concerned with Hegseth. Even Shelley didn't care for Hegseth, if I recall. I was most concerned, and you were too, but my number one concern was RFK, and we just had this fiasco this last week during his
So RFK Jr. said a lot of awful and ignorant things at his confirmation hearings last week, but this one is probably one of the worst.
We should not be giving black people the same vaccine schedule that's given to whites because their immune system is better than ours. Can you please explain what you meant?
There's a series of studies, I think most of them by Poland, that show that to particular antigens that blacks have a much stronger reaction. There's differences in reaction to different products by different races. The Poland article suggests that blacks need fewer antigens.
First of all, Mr. Kennedy, it's black people. We are not the blacks. We are not your laundry. So please address us as such. Thanks. Second, I tracked down the research that Kennedy is trying to quote here, and it's not from Poland, it's from a researcher with the last name Polland. So, yeah, that's going to be useful if you're trying to look this up. Anyway, here's the main relevant paper. So in this paper, the researchers were looking at the immune response following vaccination with rubella vaccines. Specifically, they were looking at the number of antibodies that participants produced after the vaccine, and they also looked at 2 immune signaling molecules. And among the participants in the study, there were a few different ethnicities, so the researchers looked at the antibody response by race, which is leading RFK Jr. to make the claim that blacks are producing better immune responses following vaccines because they have better immune systems, and thus they don't need as many vaccines as everyone else. And that could not be a dumber statement after reading this paper. Not only has Gregory Polland, the lead author of this study, repeatedly said that Kennedy's claims are wildly inaccurate here, but no rational person could read this paper and genuinely think what Kennedy is claiming here. First of all, the authors in this paper were only looking at antibodies and a few signaling molecules. They were not looking at vaccine effectiveness, nor were they looking at vaccine side effects. When it comes to vaccine effectiveness, the difference in number of antibodies that they measured among the different ethnicities here might not matter. You might just need a certain threshold of antibodies, after which there's no real difference in benefit. But vaccine effectiveness or safety were not measured in this study, so you can't go referencing it when making claims about vaccine effectiveness or safety. It's really important to know that your immune system has multiple different components, not just antibodies. It also has T cells and a whole host of immune signaling molecules that were not measured here. So there are multiple different reasons why the vaccine effectiveness and safety could be equal in these different ethnicities, despite a difference in antibody production. And sure enough, throughout the whole scientific literature, I'm not aware of any papers that are convincingly demonstrating that there are differences in vaccine effectiveness and safety across different ethnic groups. The second huge issue in making these conclusions that Kennedy is making based off this paper is that the group that he got the blacks analysis from consists of about 284 black people total. Meanwhile, the Caucasian group included about 1,400 people. So not only is there an argument to be made about the statistical confidence between comparing a large group to a much smaller group, but when it comes to Kennedy's argument, it's really important to point out that this group does not represent all black people. You can't make sweeping conclusions about an entire ethnic group by referencing a study that had a relatively small sample size and didn't even study the things that you're making claims about. So I just really want to drive this point home that making this incredibly stupid claim that based on this paper, the blacks need an entirely different vaccine schedule is just really, really stupid. And it's, again, one of the many reasons that show that RFK Jr. is not fit to be head of HHS. Not in the slightest. Anyway.
Man, Shelley always escapes when I got the facts. Because you know me, Emille, I'm always on the side of the facts. I don't care whether it's coming from the left or for the right. I just want to weed it out and get the facts. And unfortunately, me and Shelley specifically had an argument over what RFK said. So I hate that I don't have him here to hear that was Dr. Wilson, a biologist, goes by Dr. Funk. I've been on the show with him before or whatever. But me and Shelley were having a back and forth on his page, and I was stating everything that Dr. Wilson pointed out in that video. Prior to seeing the video, I just had a video yesterday because I did the research myself. I'm like, there's no way we can have this guy who misinterprets studies as our health czar. Impossible to me. Impossible. And while here it is, I can agree with RFK's focus on the front end, be healthy. He's very healthy himself, right? He has a focus on the front end. But I can find a scientist or a doctor who focuses on that to be the health czar. Don't give me a guy who's focused on the front end but can't read a damn study. That's crazy to me. Your thoughts, King?
So this is one of those moments where I just shake my head because the bits and pieces of the confirmation hearing I read about were appalling to me. And where he has some great issues that I think he should advance, you're talking about the front end health, eat right, make sure that the food supply is not contaminated with chemicals and all that sort of stuff. That makes perfect sense. But I promise you, there is a very highly qualified, MAGA loyal scientist who could articulate those same things and read a study. So correct. Your point is 100% true. My concern is that when he spoke like that, he reinforced myths and narratives that harm us, that physiologically harm us, care that we have study after study shown that Black people are not getting the level of care they need. Black people are not getting the care, the drugs they need, because they are thought, even people who have graduated from nursing and medical school still believe Black people have thicker skin. Black people have higher pain tolerance. Black people have stronger immune systems. These are things that are killing our women during childbirth. These are things that are harming us, whether we're getting the right care after a heart attack. These are things that are preventing us from recovering quickly after a stroke, because these beliefs promulgate. They continue to permeate the medical establishment. And now the Secretary of HHS, who looks like he's going to be confirmed, repeats one of these myths, and now it's more likely to entrench rather than go away. It's frustrating, maddening to see this.
The blacks, Emille, we're super Negroes. You didn't know that?
We love to believe that of ourselves. We want to be that.
No, I'm not talking about belief. No, I'm actually mad at the narrative that we know.
That is exactly my point.
400 years. Yeah, it's been put forth, and
right.
He pushed that along. And I remember when I first mentioned that, I actually mentioned that because Shelley doesn't like the vaccines, right? So He pointed out, is that what you got out of it? It's absolutely what we got out of it. That's how we have maternal death so much higher for Black women currently in a quote unquote developed country. We have the lowest maternal death rate for quote unquote developed countries for our African American sisters due to all of those myths, and the Blacks not needing vaccines, even though he read the story, the study completely wrong. like Dr. Funk points out, it was not from Poland, it's Dr. Pollen. Because one of the things I didn't say to Shelley, which blew my mind, I was like, why the hell is Poland studying us? I'm like, I thought to myself, that doesn't make common sense, but I didn't address it, because here's one thing, and I'll be done with this. I'm on my rant right now because I care about us having the right information, because I love us too much to lie to us. And so something that we quite often don't understand about science. I'm not a scientist like Dr. Wilson. I'm a science enthusiast. But one thing that we don't understand, I learned this from my good friend, Brother Ump, is science in itself is counterintuitive. The reason I'm pointing that out is because your common sense thoughts are not going to lead you to a scientific conclusion. That's why the propaganda such as RFK misreading and interpretation can sound like it makes sense, because linear thought is what we use for common sense thought. Science actually has a methodology that actually often will be counterintuitive. The example I always like to use to make sure that I'm being clear with this is why not everyone on the earth, but plenty of people in the past thought the sun revolved around the earth. That's common sense, linear thinking. And then when you actually do the science on it, you find out, oh, the earth is actually circling the sun. That's science versus common sense, linear thinking. Science in itself is counterintuitive. And that's why people like, in this case, Shelley was like, oh, what Robert Kennedy is making sense. Everybody how can everybody have the exact same vaccine schedule? Like, that's what he was asking from hearing RFK. He thought was a smart thing, and it's the dumbest thing ever. And that's potentially about to be confirmed as our health czar. Yeah, that's why I disliked it, because we've already been harmed medically in so many ways. And I want to even add this context, because quite often when I'm quote unquote on the side of science, it's as if people don't understand. I'm fully aware of the Tuskegee experiment. I tell people to go read exactly what happened so that you don't misappropriate a myth from that to apply to now. And so we've been harmed with that experiment and all the way to the end of thinking we're quote unquote super Negroes, as RFK didn't say blatantly, but he did blatantly say.
And he did say it.
That's all I got, man. Thank you for the extra time, brother. You got anything you want to say before we go?
Yeah, look, we're here to unpack the propaganda. Sometimes we get combative or we get frustrated, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is see past the BS, see past the stuff that hides the truth. We want the facts. So we encourage our listeners to go look for the information themselves. And what we try to do is present that. So thank you guys for listening and being a part of that. And thank you, Montoya, for hosting a space where we try to unpack the propaganda.
No, absolutely. See y'all next time. Pop-up shows. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. Make sure you are subscribing to the page as well. All right, let me put the subscribe thing up, and then we out of here. I gotta find it. Here it is. All right, cool. See y'all next time.